Hey everyone, hope you're having an awesome day. My name is Lynn and I'm one of the co-founders of LayerCI, and I'm joined today by Justin from Ghost Inspector. So he's actually wearing a Ghost Inspector shirt. Oh, I should have worn my LayerCI shirt
Yeah,
too.
right.
That's so cool. Justin is the founder and CEO of Ghost Inspector, an automated testing service that makes it really easy for you to test your website or application using browser automation. And it's actually super intuitive whether you are technical or non-technical. So Justin's going to show you a little bit more of the technical side, but feel free to ask any questions at the end. Agenda for today is really, I'm going to let Justin take the floor, really get into the bulk of the technical presentation. Justin, if you have any words to say before we get started.
No, I'm ready to go. Thanks so much for the intro, and yeah, really happy to be here. LayerCI is really awesome. I feel like it pairs really awesome with Ghost Inspector, and I'm excited to show what we've got.
All right, Justin, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Hey everyone. So, as Lynn mentioned, my name is Justin Clem. I'm the founder and CEO of Ghost Inspector, and I'm really excited to be here today to pair up with LayerCI and integrate our two products together and show you how nicely they pair. For those of you who are kind of new to some of these products and coming from either side, just quick intros to the products. LayerCI is a continuous integration service, and it lets you load up your full stack in your pipeline, so front end, back end, database, and also creates these really awesome snapshots and preview URLs that make it really easy to access these different builds of your website and application, which is perfect for Ghost Inspector because what we do is we're an end-to-end testing service, and we allow you to create tests that are based in your browser that are going to walk through your application and do the types of things that users do. So you can imagine like logging in, signing up, adding items to the shopping cart, checking out, using LayerCI to launch your builds, and then using Ghost Inspector to get in there and use those preview environments and run your tests is really intuitive. I don't have many slides today. This is really the only one that's going to cover just the agenda of what I'll be walking through. What we'll do first is create a test for application. We have a little bit of a demo store that we'll boot up. We'll add a LayerCI file to our repository, and that's going to allow us to run that test, our Ghost Inspector suite in the build. We'll go ahead and trigger a build with LayerCI. We'll see that launch and say LayerCI, create the snapshot, and see Ghost Inspector run the test on that build. Then we'll go ahead and actually fail that build just to see what that looks like. And you can see your test fail and your build fail. It'll also give us an opportunity to look at Ghost Inspector's visual testing feature. And then lastly, we'll talk a bit about branches. So when you're using a service that kind of lives externally from your code, there's always this discussion around how you're kind of syncing up your tests with your branches. And I'll give you a couple different solutions for doing that, ranging from kind of really simple organization to more technical solutions where you can actually commit your Ghost Inspector test to code if that's your preferred approach. And we'll try to create a new feature branch and run a test using one of those simple approaches. So with that agenda laid out, let's take a look at the demo app that we've got. So we've got this little Next.js website that we can launch that's going to run a store. So I've got my GitHub repository here. I've got this running locally. I can do npm start, and I've got it on my localhost port 3000. So I'll come in here, I'll refresh it, and here's our store, Area 51. We've got some things down here that you can add to your shopping cart. So we can kind of imagine for this demo that this is our company's website, and this is what we want to QA and build. We've also got the production version of this site, right? So this one's like publicly accessible at demo.ghostinspector.com. You can easily run tests there, but we'll show you how to do it on your actual builds. Let's pop over to Ghost Inspector first. This is our Ghost Inspector dashboard. So it's basically just a way of seeing all your suites and all your tests at a high level, and you can get an understanding of like what's passing and what's failing. I've created this LayerCI demo folder that we're going to use today. I've got two suites in here, so main and accounts, and I'll explain a little more why I've got these two different suites later on, but we're going to pop into this main suite, and that's going to correspond to our main branch. Now with Ghost Inspector, you can actually use our app to create your test right in here. And we have a codeless editor that makes it really easy to define your clicking and your assigning and any JavaScript you want to run. So I could do that here, but we also have a recording extension that makes this really simple. So what we can do is pop over to our store here. Our recording extension is available in Chrome and Firefox, so you can install it. And the first time you launch it, you'll log into your account. And at that point, you can start creating new tests. You can edit your existing tests and so on. So we're going to create a new test here. We'll hit start recording. And at this point, the extension is green here in my toolbar, and it's going to start capturing the things that I'm doing. So for this test, let's go ahead and we'll add an item to our shopping cart. So we'll click on this cup planter. I'll go add to cart. You notice I get this message that pops up. I'm a big fan of like adding assertions throughout your test. And the idea is that I performed an action, I got a response. I want to make sure I got the right response. So with Ghost Inspector, I can open up the extension and I can switch over from recording operations to making assertions. And when I do that, I get kind of like a crosshair cursor here, and I'm able to click on elements. So I'm going to click on this added to cart element and make sure as part of my test that that showed up. I'll come back to the extension and we'll keep going here. We'll switch back to recording operations. I'll close this modal. We'll click on our cart, and then we'll do another assertion here. I always like to end my test as well with an assertion to make sure we ended up where we expected to be. So I'll make an assertion here. I'll come into cup planter. That's kind of an obvious one to make sure that's present. I'll create an assertion, and we'll kind of stop there. So I could continue on. I could fill out this checkout. We've got support for lots of things like Stripe checkout and other kind of complex scenarios, but we'll just stop here. We'll finish this recording. Let's call it add item to cart. We'll put this in our main suite here. We'll talk about our screenshot comparison a little bit later. We'll do an initial test run, and we'll save this test. So what the extension did is recorded my actions, my clicks, my assertions. It turned it into a Ghost Inspector test. It sent it off to my account, and I get a link to it. So if I click this, I'm going to be taken to the Ghost Inspector app here. And now what Ghost Inspector has done on our side is we've taken that test, we've launched it in Chrome with kind of a default screen size and default geolocation, and we're running through it on our side. So we've got an automated browser that's running through those same exact steps for us. And what it's going to do in a minute here is it'll come back with the results. It'll show us our steps. It'll include a screenshot, and it'll also include a video recording as well. While this is running, I'm going to pop into our editor and just show you this. We won't be diving deep into this today, but you can see what the test looks like here. Our clicking, our assertions, various actions that are available, selectors, backup selectors, ways to target the elements. We can add conditionals as well to skip steps or execute steps. So lots of different tools available to you here. We're back out at our test now. We can see our test run completed, and we've got the result. So a couple of things here, some details about the browser and screen size. This took a little over a minute to run. You can see we ran this against our production URL in this case, and you get an idea of what's going on. What the recorder is going to do is capture basically the best selectors it can generate using both CSS and XPath. It'll generate backup selectors when that makes sense, and also give you the ability to jump in here and customize these and kind of segment them out. Here you can see where we added the item to the cart. Here you can see where we checked for that cup planter at the end. Over on the right side here, we get a screenshot of where our test completed on our cart screen. And we also get a video of the test running on our server. So we highlight the elements as they're being interacted with, so you can see these steps in action, and we give you the step number as well. So this helps make it like really clear for debugging. So cool. Okay, so we've got a test that's running against production. I can run this, manually if I'd like. I can set a schedule in here and kind of run this like at various times. But what we want to do is run this when we trigger our LayerCI builds. So what I'm going to do is pop over to my editor here, and I'm inside my Next.js project. And the way I'm going to have this run in LayerCI is by adding a layer file that's going to provide a set of instructions that LayerCI is going to carry out to launch my site. So I've got one kind of specced out here. I'll just run through some of these instructions really quickly. We're using Ubuntu as a base. We're installing Node. We're copying over our files. We're doing kind of like some initial, Node installation stuff and running a build. Obviously, if you're using like Ruby or Go or something else, these commands might look different. Then we're launching our site here, which by default we saw was going to run on port 3000. This next command is a really awesome feature of LayerCI, this expose website command. So what this is telling LayerCI is that I'm going to have this website, this app running on localhost port 3000. And what LayerCI is going to do is create a URL that I can use that's going to give me access to that site. So I can use it during testing. I can also use it afterwards if I need to jump back to that build and review. It's a really handy thing to have, and it's not something that most CI tools give to you. Typically, you're kind of doing this on your own. Oftentimes, you're launching like an ngrok tunnel and you're creating this temporary URL. It's just a much worse experience. So, using this command is really nice. It gives you this environment variable with a URL to your website, and we use that in our test runs. Continuing on here, we're pulling out our Ghost Inspector API. LayerCI also gives you like secret storage, so you have the ability to store the API keys that you might need. We're going to install our Ghost Inspector CLI package, so that lets us really easily run our tests with a simple command. And the last thing I'm going to do before I actually run those tests is just add a checkpoint here. So LayerCI is really smart about the way it caches all the different layers. And what I want to do is make sure it's stopping and taking a snapshot here once I've got everything running. So I've got my website running and I've got the URL ready. I want to tell LayerCI to add a check here. Finally, we're going to trigger our test. So we're using npx. This is like a node command for executing a package. So we're using our Ghost Inspector package. We're going to trigger a whole suite using the execute command. And then what we're going to do here, where I've got this stubbed out, is we're just going to drop in our suite ID. So in this case, we've got this main suite set up. I'm going to pull this ID right out of the URL, and I'm going to drop it in. So this is going to tell LayerCI what suite to use. Now all I need to do is commit this change. So I'll just do git add, commit, say add suite ID, and we'll push it. So this is going to push to GitHub, which is going to trigger a new build in our LayerCI account. So you can see we've got the commit here where we're adding the suite ID. We've already got the run in progress. And it's kind of amazing how fast this is because LayerCI has cached a bunch of these layers. Because I ran this while we were plotting it out, it's already triggered the test. So if I pop over to Ghost Inspector here, you can see my suite is running. And what you see here is that preview URL that LayerCI creates for you. So you've got kind of like a uuid.cidemo.co. And that is that URL that LayerCI creates pointing to this specific build of your app or website. And now when Ghost Inspector runs, instead of running the test on my production environment where I recorded it, it's going to pass in that specific preview URL and it's going to run the test there. So we'll see in a second, this will come back and we'll have the LayerCI URL swapped in there. I should just point out while this is running, you have direct access to this site in your build as well. So you can use this view website button and jump into this build of your website right through LayerCI. I can always copy and paste this URL later on and use that when I trigger my test manually. I could run this at some later point and come in here and drop this in. But because we've got this in our layer file, we triggered the build automatically here. So you can see how it's opening up this preview URL and it's running through with my same steps. The final screenshot looks the same because it's the exact same build that's running in production. The video is going to look the same as well. So now we've got this test that's in our main suite. And if I pop back to LayerCI, we can see this completed here, add item to cart, completed successfully. So like at the most fundamental level, that's how you can get started integrating these tests. What I would typically do here is start to build out my core flows that I want to test. So what are the things that really need to work on my site and kind of start there, start building tests for those. One thing that's nice about Ghost Inspector is that we run your tests in parallel by default. So if you've got 10, 15, 20 tests in here and you trigger this with LayerCI, it's going to trigger all those tests at the same time and you can rip through them really quickly. Okay, so we've got a passing test, we've got a passing build. The next thing I wanted to cover in my agenda was demonstrating a failing build. So I just want to show you what happens when your tests fail. I mean, ultimately, you're going to run into failures. That's really why your tests are there. So the way we're going to do this is basically by intentionally breaking our app. When I'm clicking on this product in the beginning, I'm clicking this product box. So the way we're going to break this is just by yanking this whole box out of there. And, can assume maybe this was a mistake or someone changed something that they shouldn't have or that they were unaware of. So we've got this anchor tag here in our React code. We're just going to yank that out and save this file. So let's say this happens in my branch. I'm going to go ahead and commit that change. We'll say broken product. Push this up. And you can see right away, LayerCI gets that commit and again is running through those steps, launching that environment. So in this case, it's probably going to take slightly longer. Oh, no, wait, no, the LayerCI's got it cached. I actually tested this before. So again, it's got the snapshot cached and it's already triggered the test. So if we pop in here again to Ghost Inspector, it's going to be running our test again on this new broken build. And same logic applies here. I can come in and view my website in LayerCI. I can actually see what this broken build looks like. And you can see how I've kind of botched this and I've removed these products so that they're not there anymore. Our Ghost Inspector test is going to take slightly longer because when it gets to this first step, it's not going to find that product box, right? So it's going to kind of like check some other selectors for it. It's going to wait to see if it becomes visible. It's going to wait to see if maybe it gets created later on. And those are all things you have control over. But ultimately, you can see it was not able to find the element, right? So basically got stuck and failed on step number one. If I pop over to my screenshot here, actually, let's just pop in right into the compare. You can see I've got my baseline, what this is supposed to look like, the cart screen where it's successful. I've got my homepage now where I'm stuck and I don't want to be. And then I've got this screenshot comparison. This isn't probably the most useful example to demonstrate our visual comparison, but what it's doing here is basically a visual diff. And it's layering these two screenshots on top of each other and looking for differences. Because we're on two completely separate pages here, the differences are pretty obvious. And so there's a whole lot of red being highlighted here. But when you run into changes that are a lot more subtle, for instance, if we were on the cart screen and some text was missing or price was missing or product wasn't there, this can be really useful in kind of pinning down what changed, especially even if your steps still worked. So like functionally your test worked, but visually something was broken. This can be kind of like an added insurance layer to make sure things are working the way they're supposed to work, but also looking the way they're supposed to look. And if we pop back over to our LayerCI build, you can see our test failed and it failed to build, which is what we want, right? Like we wouldn't want to be merging this branch or pushing it to production. We want it to fail. I'll just go ahead and fix this real quick and we'll commit the fix. And once again, this build's going to happen probably pretty quickly because LayerCI, we're just kind of like reverting back to what we have. It's probably got a bunch of these layers cached and is going to boot up those snapshots and run those Ghost Inspector tests on it again. You can see we're already down here running. And if we refresh our test, we've got another test run. Kind of like an introduction to what you're going to see when these things fail. I know with LayerCI, they'll email you to let you know that it's failed. I think they also recently added Slack. Same kind of thing on the Ghost Inspector side. You can get email, Slack. We can trigger like a PagerDuty alarm or Microsoft Teams. So like a couple different ways to get notified. And you can kind of decide what approach fits into your workflow. I want to pivot a little bit now and talk about branching approaches. So kind of one of the fundamental things that comes into play when your tests kind of live outside of your code is that you want to be able to keep them in sync with your different branches. So typically when you're working on code, you might have like a feature branch for a new feature you're adding or things you're working on. If you're building tests like traditionally, like writing them in something like Cypress or Selenium or Puppeteer or Playwright, and you're committing those, you're kind of going like the normal coding Git approach where your branch has those tests, you adjust them or add them, you merge them back in, and that's pretty nice. When your tests are external, there are the added benefits of like you've got a SaaS product that gives you lots of things, but then you've got to kind of decide how you're going to keep things in sync. So on the simple side, what you can do is what I've laid out here in this folder. You can create a suite each time you create a new branch that corresponds to it. I've got this accounts suite, and in a sec, we'll create an accounts branch. So I could add tests there for my new functionality. I also have a really easy way to clone tests and to adjust them in the editor if I need to do that. And what I would do is either add or swap in these IDs in my layer file. And then ultimately, when I merge that code, I can move these tests around, or I can just leave them separate if that makes more sense. In some cases, I might actually want like separate feature suites and just have that distinction. You can get a little bit smarter about this and you can use like a naming convention. So you might always name your suite to correspond with your branch, and you can use a little bit of logic in your LayerCI file to look for it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, something that we added pretty recently that's a little more technical, but it's kind of this hybrid approach that some of our customers are liking. And that is we actually give you the ability to store your tests in your code if you'd like. So we basically have a JSON format that you can import, export, use to update your tests. And what you can do is actually commit that to your coding repository. You get the benefits there of Git where you've got your set of tests in code, you can adjust them in code. And then what you do, I'll show you what this looks like real quick in our docs. Got kind of a simple JSON file defining your test. When you use our CLI, instead of saying like trigger this suite using the ID, you say trigger this test, we call it on-demand testing, and you pass it the actual JSON file for the test. So you could imagine having like a folder of Ghost Inspector tests in your project that contain all these tests in JSON format, and you just make your adjustments there. And you're like pushing them on the fly to Ghost Inspector and saying, just like run this test definition, run that test definition. And that can kind of give you best of both worlds. But ultimately it's kind of up to you which direction makes the most sense, kind of based on how technical your team is or like what approaches you all like. What we're going to do really quickly and just kind of sneak in is creating a feature branch here. So I'm going to check out a new branch. We'll call it accounts. And I don't really have time to make significant changes to my app here, right, and add a whole feature. But let's assume for a sec that in this branch, what I've added is accounts functionality. So I've added a sign up and a login process, and I want to test that alongside of my branch. So let's go ahead and we'll record a test to test our sign up. Start recording, click sign up. Now Ghost Inspector has various ways to kind of customize these email addresses. Of course, you can use timestamps or random values that are generated. We also have the ability to actually receive emails. So if this sign up sends an email, I can actually, as part of Ghost Inspector's feature set, receive that email and open it. But in this case, we'll just go ahead and sign up. We'll make sure we add our assertion at the end. And we'll go ahead and save this test. So this one, we'll call it sign up, and we'll drop it in our accounts suite here and save it. And same kind of thing here, right? So we've got another test. Initially, it's going to run it on our production site because that's where we're recording it. But what we're going to do is we'll add this accounts suite to our layer file in that particular branch. So I can kind of pick and choose how I want to do this. I could swap it in, but I think what I'm going to do is just add it on top of our main suite so we can run both of these. So this will be accounts. I'll pull out this suite ID, pop this one in. And I'll just go ahead and commit this update to the branch. So we'll go git add new suite, push this. And now what's going to happen is when LayerCI does this build, it's going to actually trigger both suites on my branch. So first it's going to trigger that main suite, which is probably already done. So here's that first suite, and that contains the add to cart test. And now it's running our second suite here, and that includes our sign up. So let's see if we can find that one. So here's our sign up test, and it's running through that as part of our branch. So you can kind of pick and choose what makes sense and what trade-offs kind of make sense in terms of keeping your tests separate or keeping them integrated, and whether you want them in code or whether you want to kind of self-manage. But using suites or using the approach, you generally have a nice option for doing either. We can see here our test finished again with this preview URL. So that was what I wanted to cover, but you can see how quickly, I was able to create 2 tests, get them recorded, get them integrated, have them running in LayerCI. The speed of these 2 products together is really pretty amazing because LayerCI does such a good job of snapshotting, and your Ghost Inspector tests are able to run so rapidly in parallel that it makes this build process super, super snappy. So really excited about these 2 products working together. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Lynn.
All right. Thank you so much, Justin, for that amazing presentation. What's the best way to get started with the platform, Justin, as well as in the future if they have any other questions?
Yeah, sure. So we have a free trial that takes 2 seconds to sign up for, and you get 2 weeks. You can invite all your team members. You can use the extension, the whole feature set. We give you everything on all of our plans, so email testing, accessibility, and a huge amount of capacity. So feel free to pop over and sign up. We're super active on support if you have questions. So definitely ping us if you have questions later on after this presentation.
Awesome. Awesome. And also, we do have a integration partnership as well. So on the Ghost Inspector side, they've got really awesome docs on LayerCI as well, and vice versa. So feel free to go check it out on the docs if you're a software engineer. Thank you again, Justin, for the awesome presentation, and everyone for attending. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks. Thanks everybody for joining. Take care.